myself together for this one. I have been meaning to do, oh my gosh, I know what it's called. It's The Letter. Who is the author? I had it all wrong. It's not The Letter. It is The Girl in the Letter by Emily Gunnis. Sorry, I had to compile the list of names because there are quite a few characters in this novel. And so I made myself a little note in which I had to swipe out of the way in order to remember who wrote this book. But there we go. This is something that's been on my TBR for a moment. And it wasn't quite what I wanted. I'm reading another book, The Key by Catherine Hughes. They're very similar in style, very similar in subject matter. They are both British authors, but despite the fact that apparently Emily Gunnis, who wrote the book that I'm eventually going to talk about today, is the daughter of, I guess, some well-known author. And this is her debut novel, so give it some grace. I thought it was a bit simplistic, that she could have dove deeper, she could have been more engaging, she could have simplified a little bit more, and even the writing style. I think if anything, that was what was most disappointing, because it could just be a sign of the times. It could very well be that her parent, I think it's her mother, she probably wrote by the guidelines of her time, whereas things have changed. And this book isn't that old. For one, a lot of adverbs. For two, she did a good bit of head hopping, which if you don't know what head hopping is going from character to character without giving us time to process. So it's like, if you're in my head, and then all of a sudden you're in the head of the person in the room with me, and then all of a sudden you're in the head of the person on their other side, it can get confusing because, at least for me, perhaps because I bought the audiobook, perhaps it looks different on the page than it does listening to it. But it started off almost imperceptibly, and then at the very end, it's like she just threw up her hands and said, hey, I'm gonna do whatever I want, and she starts jumping around people's heads, and I was like, wait a minute, I thought we were with so-and-so, so why are we now with so-and-so? And it's almost like sometimes she would creep in to character 2 just to then return to character 1, and she didn't even know it. It wasn't, in my opinion, the best written book, and I think that sometimes reflects in the engagement of it. But for the premise, it's about this young woman named Sam who is a cub reporter. She is going through a messy breakup / divorce. She and her daughter, Emma, are living with her Nana. Apparently, ever since she had her daughter and she was not able to give the same kinds of time to her job, her boss has been giving her puff pieces, has been passing her over for promotions. And what happens is we open with her. She was supposed to go and celebrate her grandma's birthday, but then she gets called in to do something else. And what that is basically get this person whose family was just in the news to open her door to Sam so that Sam can get this scoop, which Sam will then never get credit for. I didn't understand it. I was like, why? First off, I guess we're making a statement here about how women are treated in the workplace. But second, it's like, okay, so Sam is supposed to be off, but her boss, knowing full well this is not going to further her career, demands that she go to this home and somehow make her way inside of the home and get the information just to hand it off to somebody else? Is that really how the news works? But while she's going up to the house, all the other reporters are like, oh, it's never going to happen. And oh yeah, there's this really creepy woman in the house next door who is just going to stare you down. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing right there. But she comes back home and she meets up with her Nana, and this is something that I had intended to reread. I just didn't have time. But in reading other people's reviews, apparently the letters, grandmother had been reading them and had fallen asleep, and this is how Sam discovered them. Honestly, my impression was she gets home, Nana is like, oh, I've got something to show you, takes her into the bedroom, pulls the bed out from the wall and is like, oh, look, there's this den, because when your grandfather was alive, he would listen to his music, and that's where I would hit the wall to get him to turn it down. And then they find the letter on the ground. I don't know. In any case, she finds the letter. The grandmother blames it on the grandfather, saying that, oh, he owns that antique store. All kinds of things would be found and come home with him. Sam finds a letter, or, reads this letter written by this young woman named Ivy, who had gotten pregnant as a teenager and then sent to the home for women and children. It does flash back and forth between timelines. I gotta go and say, regarding Sam and her ex, Ben, I thought it was unnecessary. There was a severe lack of development with Ben, because all we know now is somehow, since the birth of their child, so they got pregnant and then married and then they had this baby. So it very well could have been a case of, we shouldn't have been together, but we wanted to be a family for our child. Somewhere along this line, they start disliking each other. Or at any rate, he starts hating Sam. And he is quite the villain, quite the antagonist throughout this novel. He is extremely verbally and emotionally abusive. We get a real sense that he doesn't care for his daughter. He doesn't want to be a parent, and he makes as many excuses under the guise of job interviews so that he does not have to be an active participant in their daughter's life. My question throughout this entire novel was, why were they together? And really, what happened to drive them apart? We get, I think, 2 instances in which Sam references how things had been different. We see their first date, how great it was, how he used to be so loving and caring. But what happened? And it took a really long time to even get to that point of, why was she with him in the first place if he's such a jerk? Reads this letter from Ivy, and for me, Ivy was the shining star. I didn't mind Sam, but her love interest is her coworker named Fred. She is aware that Fred has a crush on her. Spoiler here, at the very end, we do get his perspective, at which he's like, oh, of course I'll do anything for her because I'm in love with her. She definitely takes advantage of the fact that he will do whatever she wants. I liked her determination. I liked the fact that she wanted more for herself and for her daughter, and she obviously cares for her grandmother. But I thought she also lacked a little bit of development. It could be because there was a host of characters, which is why I needed my list. And there were people that thought that this novel suffered from too many characters. On one hand, I agree, because she fits so many POVs in there that it could have been the reason that other characters were underdeveloped or some subplots were left underdeveloped. But on the whole, we didn't get that many perspectives. The main POVs were Ivy, Kitty Cannon, Sam. But what would happen is there were a lot of deaths, a lot of murders in this book. When I was reading these reviews about these murders, I was thinking something super grisly, and they kind of were, but not to the extent that I was anticipating. We would hear about certain characters, we would experience certain characters, and then all of a sudden we would get one chapter from that character, which would give us insight into how they died. Those were kind of interesting. Did we necessarily need them? I don't know. I liked them. I thought they provided depth. They provided more interest than we would have had otherwise, which I know I'm taking forever to get through my plot, but my big issue or question here, and this isn't necessarily solely pertaining to this novel. This one, like The Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman, dealt with these girls going to places run by nuns and the violence and the abuse that ensued. So my question is, why? I probably should have done some research into it. Obviously, I did not, so please enlighten me. I understand the Catholic Church can be very strict, and so the mindset of a nun can be very type A, very black and white. But all these depictions, and I understand it makes for better reading, it makes for better viewing. All these depictions, it makes them less Christian and more sinister and just pure evil. Is that how it really is, or is that just a way that this history has gotten skewed? But for me, that was a huge problem because it was an overarching question, because I was like, are we just getting stereotypical now? Like, can we not come up with some alternative to a place being run by nuns? Like, why is every single nun in this novel absolutely wretched? I wanted more motivation behind the nuns. I get it. Their belief system says that what these girls have done is a sin. They deserve to be punished, maybe? I don't know. But it's like, where's the humanity? Why do all of these nuns and all these stories lack humanity? How do you not see a newborn baby and feel something? I did not like the stereotyping part of this novel. Anyways, so Ivy, we see her at this home for women and children, and it's like a workhouse. So they get severely punished if they talk, if they do anything outside of their chores, if they just period, like they get severe punishments. And through her letters, because she's writing to the father of her child, this guy named Alistair, who we do get one chapter from his perspective because he is one of the people that dies. And it was so far to the end. This was another issue I had, because I was like, okay, he's obviously another stereotype. Just this guy who got a girl knocked up and we never hear from him again. And so I was like, first off, Ivy, get it through your head. He's not going to respond to you. Second, why? Like, she seems like she has a lot of character and she's really intelligent, and she's not just going to sleep with the first guy that comes along, but then she's like 15, so she probably is going to get run by her hormones a little bit more than I'm giving her credit for. But I wanted to know who this guy was. Why did she think he was going to pay attention to her? Why did she think that he would pay for her to get out of there? Who was this guy? I had very little information about him until the very end, in which we learned that he was, I guess, at the university. He played soccer, and the whole reason that he didn't want anything to do with her was because it would ruin his chances of playing soccer professionally. We do get the idea that he's wealthy, but then on the other hand, it doesn't feel like he's wealthy at all, because the whole reason is he needs to play soccer in order to get somewhere in life. He does basically say one thing, turn right around and say the other, in which she's like, I really did love her, but da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, wait a minute. And the one thing that I can't decide if I like it or not, all these letters she's writing him, we learn early on, which I'll get back. We learn early on that he has returned her letters unopened. My first impression is that he never opened any of them. So this is when I'm like, okay, what kind of outlining did she do? Because when we get to his perspective, he's like, oh, I used to read them, and then they got so nonsensical that I stopped, and I guess this is when he sent them back. And so at this point, I'm just like, oh my gosh, why wouldn't you believe her? And so this is what I don't know if I like or not. Because is he not really giving her a chance? Or is all the stuff she's telling him, which is truth, is it all so unbelievable that he thinks it's a story? Before I lose my train of thought, I would put a pin in this, but I know I would not remember. There are two kind of people in charge of the whole organization, Father Benjamin and Mother Carlin. They do have this other guy named Dr. Jacobson who is a doctor. He's a GP. So he will refer his pregnant patients, his teenage pregnant patients, to them. And they orchestrate everything. So apparently they spoke to Alistair. I don't know. It was a little confusing to me because at the beginning of the novel, Ivy learns that she is going to be sent to an insane asylum. We learn later she's being sent to the insane asylum because she's causing too much trouble. She knows too much. At first, it sounds like Alistair has given permission for their baby, Rose, to be given up for adoption. But then it sounds like he was talking with Father Benjamin and Mother Carlin because somehow their conversation and things that he has to say will contribute to Ivy being committed. Back to the beginning. Ivy is going to go to an insane asylum. She has, however, befriended a young girl named, the narrator calls her Elvira. I don't know if it's just because she's British or if that's really how it should be pronounced, because the author is also British. So in my head, when I would see the name, I'm like Elvira, but Elvira. Elvira was a product of the home for mothers and children. Her mother had died in childbirth. She's actually a twin, and it was kind of interesting, but I don't know. Her father's wife had been suffering from kidney failure many years. Because of her treatment and her struggle with this disease, he seeks solace in the arms of another and gets her pregnant, and it turns out to be twins. So what I kind of have problematic here is, again, it's kind of touch and go, where we just get like a little bit of information about all this and then we move on. And how, I guess his wife, so his name is George, her name is Helena, and how she just like accepts it because, like, of course, with her being sick, and maybe this is the way I view life, and that's why it bothers me, because of course if she's being sick, then she can't give him the attention that he needs. And so, well, if he's gonna find solace in the arms of another, well, why not let him have one of those children, because like that's gonna help get him through if she dies. Anyways, Elvira is left at the home because she is the sicklier of the two. Apparently, she was left for dead, only to be discovered that she didn't die. She's adopted, but then when she's 6, that couple has managed to have a child of their own. And then there's this huge question mark about, did she or didn't she? So a little bit of spoiler here. They bring her back because they think that she tried to kill their child. Her story is that they were just taking a bath and he slipped. This is a little underdeveloped for me considering how we end up. But back to the beginning. Ivy is coming up with a way for Elvira to escape. She has come up with a way to get the key to the underground tunnel, which Elvira can escape through. She has written her the note about what to do, and that is to hide in the outhouse for X amount of time and then go to this church where she'll find her twin sister, which I'm like, how does Ivy know all of this? If she is so restricted, How does she know all of this? She snoops around a little bit, so she'll know about the twin, but how does she know where the twin goes to church? Unless it's the fact that Helena has worked for this home for women and children, and therefore Ivy knows that she's a local, and since everybody goes to church, that's the church she'll go to. Ivy's plan, her ultimate plan, because she has given up hope. Alistair's not coming to get her. She's not going to go to that insane asylum. All hope is lost. She commits suicide. So that is the distraction for Elvira to escape. She goes up to the top of the home, because this is an old Victorian mansion, and she jumps from the highest tower. We do continue to see her through her letters, which, as I said, she's the star. She really shines, and she's very strong, and she's emotionally connective. Her struggle is painful. That slow descent, not necessarily into madness, but from hope to, wow, I'm never gonna survive this, I thought was extraordinary. Basically, this whole time, Sam is shirking work and making Fred cover for her and help her get information while dealing with the drama of her ex, wrestling with the guilt of not spending time with Emma, and her Nana has a heart condition, which... The thing here is, biggest spoiler of them all. Sam's Nana is Ivy's daughter. She is portrayed as this frail, elderly woman with this heart condition. I'm like, I'm almost meh. Like, she's not that much older than me. This doesn't line up. Like, not to say that young women cannot have heart conditions, and it could be because Nana's overweight. But I was picturing Nana as a 70, 80-year-old woman, and she's like 50-something. I mean, if I'm doing my math right, which I'm probably not. But I was just like, this whole heart condition thing was a tool, a vehicle, because of all the murders that are happening and the way they're connected. Nana obviously has to be one of the murder victims. And what better way, because none of them can be proved as murders. They all look like accidents or natural deaths. So why not have another reason for it to be a natural looking death? But it doesn't line up. It just doesn't. We'll just keep doing spoilers. Elvira meets Kitty, who's her twin sister. I don't know how I would have reacted had I never known that I had an identical, I'm assuming identical, twin sister. And then all of a sudden I look into the church graveyard and I see my own face. I think I would have been a lot more skeptical than Kitty apparently was, even though she was 8. Like, I would have probably run screaming. Then again, she was by herself, because at this point, her mother had gotten, or Helena, had gotten her kidney transplant, and this is why neither she nor the father George were at church with her, because he had gone to the hospital, and she just decided, hey, I know how to get to church, so I'm gonna go. Here's another really, really big spoiler. This whole time, like, we've known that one of the twins died, and we're assuming it was Elvira, because the two girls get together. The next thing we know, one of them has died, because when she tried to go for help, the nuns ended up catching her, and then they beat her to death, and then they threw her into the septic tank with all the other bodies of people that they hadn't wanted found or known that those women and children had been at this home. If you're not picking up what I'm putting down, Kitty is the one who dies. Elvira then takes her place, which I don't buy this explanation, because it occurred to me shortly before the author tried to explain it away, because Elvira was severely malnourished, not taken care of. I think she'd been at the home for 2 years, so 2 years worth of abuse. She had been experimented on. She had been underfed. I don't think that the reasoning for why the two girls got mixed up was viable, and that is Elvira, for some reason, freaks out and is like, We've got to go back to the outhouse where I've been hiding for the last 2 days. Kitty, for some reason, says, sure. They hide out there for like hours until Elvira calms down. Kitty is like, hey, I'm gonna go get help. I'm gonna go get my dad. Elvira, hours later, realizing, oh, hey, Kitty should have been back by now. And the whole reason Kitty's not here is because the nuns caught her and she's probably dead. Leaves the hidey hole, goes back to the church, but on her way there, because she malnourished, it's February, she doesn't have the proper attire, she's basically freezing to death. She apparently, like, I didn't pick up on this when it was happening. It wasn't until it was told later in the novel, but she like stumbled into a ditch and broke her ankle or something, and then she passes out, and next thing she knows, she's coming to in the hospital, and everybody thinks she's Kitty. And so what's explained later in the novel is that, well, you know, if she'd been lying in a ditch for, I don't know, a day or so, then of course this is how she would look. I'm like, no. 2 days without food is not the same as 2 years without proper nourishment. The bruises, the pallor to the skin, the hair, the clothes. She might have been wearing Kitty's coat. And then apparently she found Kitty's shoes. But still, no. How would that explain that she's wearing the overalls from the women and children's home? It doesn't. Did they not say where'd she get these? What happens here is that I guess Elvira kind of goes mad. Or she is mad. She's angry about Ivy's plight. And this is something that I thought was dropped in and in the middle of nowhere. Her anger stems from the fact that when she was escaping, she turned around and she saw Ivy jump. Baseline, I think that's pretty cool. Like, I like the psychological effect that this would have on a young child. Ivy is the only person in her life of late who has shown her any love and affection. And now she sees her kill herself. But on the other hand, she knows how unfair it was for Ivy to have been in that situation in the first place. I like the implication, the effect that seeing this would have on Elvira so that she becomes a serial killer. But we have no idea that that's what she's seen. It is, in a sense, such a weak motivator considering all the things she had gone through that I didn't think it was necessarily necessary. If we had gotten little bits and pieces sprinkled throughout about a traumatic event, about a driving factor, about something had happened, then that would have done it for me. Maybe we are almost the end of the chapter of her escaping and she turns around and she sees something, and then we fade to black and move somewhere else. That would have been effective. But dropping it in at the very end of the book, it wasn't enough. She is so angry for Ivy that she starts to exact revenge on every single person who put Ivy in that situation. She kills Father Benjamin, and kind of this whole thing starts because the home is being torn down. So yes, Sam reads these letters, or this first letter by Ivy, but when she does research, she learns that the home Ivy had been at is being torn down. So she's now like, well, I gotta look into this, and this could be a story. What they had found when they were starting to prepare to tear down this old home was the remains of Father Benjamin in the underground tunnel. She had killed him. She had killed Mother Carlin, even though Mother Carlin was like 80 or 90. She had gone to the home where all the nuns were now residing. One of the attendants who had made some hash brownies, they had been confiscated, but then Kitty/Elvira somehow got her hands on them. Like, this doesn't really make sense to me either, because to feed this very potent LSD-laced brownie to Mother Carlin, to know that there were those kinds of brownies, and then to know that if she gave it to Mother Carlin and then Mother Carlin was more than likely going to die, it says a lot. So when Mother Carlin does die, she's calling for help from an attendant. Nobody answers her, so she decides, because she's thirsty, so she decides she's gonna go get her own drink of water. As she's on her way to the kitchen, there's a cleaning lady there. So the implication is that this cleaning lady is actually Kitty? Because then this lady is like, oh, take a load off. I'll get you something. She not only gives her something to drink, but she gives her something to eat. So I thought it was a stretch. Like, does this mean that Kitty has been doing recon work in order to know how to best kill Mother Carlin? I guess I really wouldn't put it past her, but I don't know. I feel like it's a bit extreme. She kills Dr. Jacobson because he had been referring people. And this one was hard for me to visualize. She dog-napped his prize dog, Honey, trapped the dog in the pool house, and then when he went looking for Honey and found that Honey was trapped under the pool tarp, as he was trying to get Honey out, she pushed him in, and then he couldn't get out himself. On a side note of him, Fred, the lovesick puppy dog, is enlisted to interview Dr. Jacobson's widow. And he's like, oh, do you have any files? And the woman's like super nice to him. And then she gets a phone call, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, it's time for you to go. And the assumption is that it was a phone call from her daughter. Why would her daughter have any reason to think that Fred has a nefarious motive? Like, you get the impression that whoever she's talking to realizes that he's not there for the reason he says he is. So it just, again, it doesn't really make sense except to say that Fred has to be stealthier and quicker, and there's a lot more at stake because now he's got to get out and blah, blah, blah. Then we have Helena, who dies. Somebody disconnects all of her machinery, and I think maybe injects her with something as well. George dies in a car crash, and then that one is like, somebody spoke about supernatural elements. And I don't know if they're really supernatural elements. The one time that I really thought maybe they were, rather than just hallucinations, was Kitty / Elvira claims to have been asleep and then awoken with the news that her father has died. But then from his point of view, he sees her in the road, and this is what causes him to overcorrect. He loses control and he crashes. But she's like, it couldn't have been me. I was asleep when the notification came. But then a bystander had seen a girl in a red coat as well. Kitty is like, oh, it must have been Elvira. Elvira must still be out there. So I understand that these are red herrings, that these are trying to get us to look in different directions, which sort of successful, very loosely though. What throws it all in the pot is Elvira / Kitty admits, oh, actually it was me. So it wasn't a supernatural effect. We get moments from Ivy's point of view in which Elvira disappears, and then eventually she'll come back, and she reveals to Ivy that there are other children in the attic, which she had denied early on in the novel. She said she was the only one up there. So they meet. I know I'm everywhere. They meet because Elvira is sleeping in the bed next to Ivy. Then all of a sudden, Elvira is actually sleeping in the attic. When did she switch rooms? I guess all the children who had issues, mental, physical issues, were left up in the attic. Possibly other children who couldn't get adopted out are up in the attic, and they are experimented on. And this is where all the money is made for this home for women and children, because they team up with this pharmaceutical company is trying to come up with drugs, the children are experimented on for these drugs. Kitty slash Elvira is using these drugs to drug at least some of her victims. And so my thought is all of these women from the home of women and children are actually just hallucinations from the drugs that are being given to her victims, not necessarily supernatural elements. If you've read this book, you tell me, what do you think? I don't think it was supernatural, and I didn't think it was out of place. I thought it was apropos. It fit very nicely because all these people contributed to harsh conditions for these innocent young women and children. And so why not be haunted by their sins in the last moments of life? George, Helena, Dr. Jacobson, Mother Carlin, Father Benjamin, Dr. Stone, who was the son of the guy from the pharmaceutical company. So they had fallen out when he realized what some of these pharmaceuticals were. Elvira slash Kitty didn't really care. She started seeing him as a patient, and so she kills him because she blames him for what was done to her. She kills Alistair. She gets engaged to him. She's like 18, 19. He's 10, 15 years her senior. And she kills him, and I guess she's orchestrating all of this. She must have to. But he's an asthmatic. He is worried about losing his spot on his football team because I guess at this point in time in like the 80s or the 90s, it wasn't okay to have asthma. That was looked at as a liability. So he refuses to use his inhaler. But then after the match, when he needs his inhaler, like he's waiting for Kitty, she doesn't show up. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna go to the locker room and get my inhaler, and his bag is gone. And the opposing team, who they had just beaten and he had scored the winning goal against, were of no help. So I thought it was a little chaotic, which it was supposed to be, but at the same time, it could have been cleaner. But his bag is gone, his inhaler is gone, nobody's helping him, and he dies in the parking lot. Elvira slash Kitty is standing over him. I think Ivy, the hallucination of Ivy is there as well. She tries to kill Nana, which I insinuated in the beginning, by instigating a heart attack. And she does that because when she was younger, when both girls were younger, they ended up at the same school. Kitty slash Elvira rescues, her name is Annabelle Rose slash Nana, from bullies, automatically recognizes her as Ivy's daughter, and is like, this is my connection to Ivy. Like, she has this unhealthy connection to Ivy, which for me suffices enough for her to go on a murderous rampage. This is what didn't make sense to me. Before the novel started, Ivy's father had died, I think it's World War II, and her mother remarries her father's brother. It's a loveless marriage, but he's also just not a nice dude. And they find out that Ivy's pregnant, he is having a conniption. The mother can't do anything about it. Off Ivy goes, but the mother always feels really guilty about it, especially after, because when Ivy is planning this escape for Elvira, she gets the keys to Mother Carlin's office, stumbles across the letters that Alistair had returned, as well as the admission to the insane asylum, puts it in an envelope, has this sent to her mother. So her mother knows about everything and completely 100% believes everything that Ivy is saying. Obviously, there's nothing she could have done about it, and Ivy's already gone by this point. Laws had changed by the time that Annabelle Rose is 11 or 12. Kitty slash Elvira is like 18, which means that Annabelle Rose can look for her birth family. So they are given the information for the grandmother, and they're having this conversation. So Elvira slash Kitty comes along. I don't know why, but she comes along and is automatically angry. Like, she is so ticked. And somehow she stumbles, like, sitting in this living room, she finds the letters. Maybe the grandmother had given or had them with her. And anyways, So while the grandmother and Annabelle Rose are chit-chatting, Elvira is reading these letters like it's her place and just goes off. She's like, all right, Annabelle Rose, or Rose, because that's what Ivy had named her. She's like, we're getting out of here. She gives the letters to Rose, who reads them on her own time and then decides not to speak to Kitty Elvira ever again. And I was like, why? Like, what about these letters made her angry at Elvira Kitty? It's not explained, but this led to a feeling of abandonment for Kitty Elvira. So now she's like, well, I'm gonna kill you too. She then takes Sam's daughter Emma, she kidnaps her, takes her to this home for mother and children. And the thing about the septic tank is all of those bodies decomposing creates a gas that will ignite easily. She grabs a can of petrol, she lights this house on fire, and it's going to explode because of all this noxious gas. Fred, because he had been talking to Dr. Jacobson's wife, sees Kitty, follows her. He tells Sam what's going on. Sam, who had already realized that her grandmother was in danger, has gone to the grandmother's house, realizes that Emma is gone, and then she's like, oh my gosh, Kitty has her, because she now knows that Kitty is Elvira. Fred rock climbs. He's able to use his free climbing skills to scale this house, because I don't know if Elvira is in the attic, like from where Ivy had jumped, or if she and Emma are on the roof. Again, it was a little chaotic for me. He is able to save Emma, and Kitty dies, and then we have like 3 more chapters that we don't need. Sure, a little bit of wrap up would have been good, but we did not need to learn that this story not catapults Sam, but elevates Sam to a role that she wants. It seems like she's still underneath her old boss's rule though, which didn't make sense to me, because I think she's at a completely different newspaper. She is writing this article about this home for mothers and children and the effect that it had on her personally, and about Kitty Cannon, because Kitty had been a celebrity. She had been like a talk show host, like a hard-hitting news talk show host that would like get the truth out of anybody, which that was problematic for me too, because we open up with Kitty going to this dinner in her honor because she's retired or retiring or whatnot. The whole time she's there, she is expressing all these insecurities and how all these people don't really like her, only to transition into a session with Dr. Stone, the psychiatrist, and he's like, well, are you sure that these people really feel this way about you, or like you're not actually just projecting your own feelings onto them? So she felt like she did a 180, because her whole reason for seeing Dr. Stone is so she could figure out a way to kill him. Kitty was 2 different people. I could see how, yeah, she does have insecurities because of the way she grew up. Very traumatic childhood, but they didn't slot together seamlessly. But then after we get this scene, this whole chapter about Sam recapping the entire novel, we get, I guess it's like the inquisition into Dr. Stone's death by the coroner who had spoken with Dr. Stone's son. And I was like, why did we need any of this? It was, oh my gosh, there was so much we did not need after Kitty Elvira dies. We just didn't need it. Tell me, Sam gets her job, she and Fred get together, the end. That was all we needed. We really did. I don't know, like, I'm making this book sound worse than it really was. It wasn't bad. I thought it moved quickly. As much as I did not understand aspects of the development and of the plot, I do think it's really interesting how these young women in these situations are treated like second-class citizens just because of a choice they've made by this other sect of people, and how basically how self-righteous this other sect of people is. Like, they've never done anything wrong in their lives. At one point thought Mother Carlin was going to admit to the fact that, well, she had gotten pregnant when she was younger, and that's kind of where her hatred is stemming from. But no, that did not come to pass. I would have liked so much more from Mother Carlin, even from Father Benjamin. I thought those two would have given so much valuable insight into why they treated the women the way that they treated them. There were quite a few missed opportunities. I don't know if I'll ever read anything again by this author, because I would have preferred something a bit more polished and mature. As I said, I am reading Catherine Hughes, who is something of a contemporary, very similar style, very similar subject matter, and hers is by far better. Hopefully it'll stay that way, and I will have good things to say, and I will have another new favorite author, because I like these historical mysteries. These things about, well, it's like this affected this, and they all, like string theory, how they all tie together. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you later. Bye.